I'm going to invite you to play along with me for a moment. Put your hand up in the air if you know anyone or if you yourself are called Sarah. See a show of hands. Do you know? Yeah, most people in the room, hands up in the air. How about if you know someone called Rebecca? Hands stayed up. You know where I'm going with this. Keep your hands up or put them back up again if you know anyone called Rachel. Fantastic. So who's missing? Keep your hands up or put your hands back up if you know anyone or if you yourself are called Leah or Leah. Fewer, it seems, with the Leah. Maybe we need to do a study on that. I don't know. I might leave that to Igor. It's Rabbi Igor. It's more his kind of thing. So our four matriarchs, of course, two of who we encounter in this week's parashah, are so celebrated that to this day, people continue to name their daughters after them. Each in their own way, these women play a pivotal role in the story of the Jewish people's beginnings in Genesis. In this week's parashah, Vayatzeh, we are introduced to Leah and Rachel, whose father manipulates and tricks them and Jacob, using them as bargaining tools to keep Jacob working for him. We know that famous story where Jacob falls in love with Rachel. Laban, her father, or Laban, her father, agrees that they can marry if Jacob works for him for 7 years. But Laban sends Leah to be wed instead of Rachel. Jacob still longs for Rachel, so Laban agrees that the two of them can be married if Jacob works for him for a further 7 years. So often, our patriarchs are the protagonists in the story, and our matriarchs play the role of wife and carriers of children, possibly with Rebecca as the exception. But this week's story is no exception. And once Leah and Rachel are married to Jacob, they begin to bear him children. Or at least to begin with, Leah does. Like Sarah, Rachel struggles with fertility. While Leah is having pregnancy and birth one after the other, Rachel is unable to get pregnant. In this week's parashah, Leah gives birth to 6 of Jacob's sons, and his only daughter, Dinah, who is not counted among the 12 tribes of Israel. After great pain and rivalry between the two sisters, Rachel finally gets pregnant and gives birth to Joseph, and then in next week's parashah, Jacob's final son, Benjamin. But wait a second. Jacob had 12 sons, and there, if you were counting, we've only got 8. Of course, you probably know, this is because of the 2 women, Zilpah and Bilha, Leah and Rachel's handmaids, who bore 4 of Jacob's children between them, but are not usually included in our list of matriarchs. Indeed, let's play our game again. Show me some hands if you know anybody named Bilha or Zilpah. 1. We got 1. I thought we might have none. Amazing. Despite giving birth to 4 of the sons of Jacob, Zilpah and Bilha are not counted among the matriarchs, and little is said about them at all. So today, we'll elevate their voices and get to know them a little bit better. Zilpah and Bilha were initially Leah and Rachel's handmaids. When Leah and Rachel went through their respective periods of infertility, they suggested that Jacob marry Zilpah and Bilha, and they gave birth to 2 sons each, just as we saw Sarah suggest with Hagar and Abraham. Yet despite one tradition telling us that Bilha and Zilpah are freed before being married to Jacob and carrying and giving birth to the sons, Bilha and Zilpah act more like surrogates, and Rachel and Leah claim the boys as their own, even naming them themselves once they are born. According to Midrash Rabbah 84:11, after Rachel's death, Bilha raised Joseph and Benjamin as if they were her own. The text tells us how her breasts even filled with milk in order to be able to feed the newborn Benjamin. It is also Bilha, rather than Leah, who takes Rachel's place in Jacob's tent after Rachel's death. There are two Aggadic traditions about who Bilha and Zilpah are. One from Midrash Agadah that says they were the nieces of Rebekah's wet nurse Deborah, and another from Genesis Rabbi that states Bilha and Zilpah were Laban's daughters, conceived from one of his concubines, so the four women were sisters together. But they were handmaids due to being born to Laban's concubine. Of course, the families in biblical times were not like our families today, and it's actually likely that all the women raised their children together, along with other women and children in their midst. In the 2002 novel The Red Tent, which is often described as modern Midrash, Anita Diamant elevates the narratives of Leah, Rachel, Bilha, Zilpah, and Dinah, imagining the world they inhabit together, the traditions and turmoil of ancient womanhood, Dinah's foremothers initiating her into women's society in those ancient times with all the skills she needed to get by. So if Bilha and Zilpah were freed, married Jacob, and bore 4 of the 12 tribes of Israel, why were they not counted among the matriarchs? We are told in Brachot 16b that it's a matter of status and caste. As Bilha and Zilpah were handmaids, similar to slaves, they do not have the status to be counted among the matriarchs. Brachot 16b states one may only call 3 people patriarchs, which is understood to mean Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and 4 people matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel. In Kabbalistic teaching, however, we learn that Bilha and Zilpah did have elevated souls, as did the matriarchs, but on different levels. While the matriarchs' souls are supposedly unaffected by the mundane goings-on of creation, it is said that Bilha and Zilpah act within the realms of creation, allowing each individual to carry holiness inherited from our matriarchs and patriarchs into the world we live in. So one might say they're a bit more relatable, highlighting the reality that the children they gave birth to were on behalf of Rachel and Leah. In more recent decades, progressive Jews from all 3 progressive denominations have sought to include our matriarchs where they are often excluded. The most common example is found in the Amidah, where our matriarchs' names are read with the names of the patriarchs. With similar sentiment, some Jewish feminist circles have looked to elevate the voices of other women in Torah whose stories are not so readily told. Bilha and Zilpah's names are actually hidden in an acrostic in the community prayers in the Reform Siddur, and there's a prayer for Bilha found at the back. Some communities, including BKY, where I previously served, have chosen to add Bilha and Zilpah to the names recited in the Amidah, honoring the part that they played, like our matriarchs and patriarchs, in the building of our early narrative. So while after today, you may decide to name your next daughter or suggest that your granddaughter be named Bilha or Zilpah, instead of one of the more traditional Jewish names, don't worry, it's not what I'm advocating for, but rather, as we tell and retell the stories of those characters we know best in Torah, let's look for the quieter, less-known voices in our tradition. See if there are ways we can honor them, and if their stories can be part of ours as well. Shabbat Shalom. And we'll turn to the